Welcome to the Botany Bistro, everyone. This is our 24th session, and I am just so excited that we have made it through almost a full year of doing these programs every other Friday. You can see that the red bud behind me is now fully leafed out, and it's ready for the coming season. And so today we're going to be talking about ecology. And we are going to wrap up our current Botany Bistro series in 2 weeks on May 17th with part 2. But today we're going to talk about part 1. And if it's your first time here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Just so you know a little bit about the Botany Bistro, I'm coming at you live from the Civic Garden Center, which is an organization that was started in 1942 during the Victory Garden movement. So we've been around for about 80 years. And we're located in the Avondale neighborhood of Cincinnati. My name is Mary Dudley, and I'm the Ecology Education Manager here at the Civic Garden Center. And today we've got a lot of cool ideas and concepts to talk about, and I also have a special guest coming on to join me towards the end of the session, so I'm very excited about that. Just to recap, I wanted to let you know what we've talked about so you can catch up if you want to go to our archive. We most recently talked about biotechnology, agronomy, ethnobotany, paleobotany, plant breeding and genetics, physiology, pathology, systematics and taxonomy, anatomy, morphology. The list is pretty extensive. But I really started this series because botany is a varied field. It has lots of different pieces to it. And as a botanist, I feel like my foundational knowledge has been so instrumental in how I approach the natural world and how I solve problems in my own garden and also consult with other people. So I was very excited to offer this series free of charge so that you can share that foundational knowledge and kind of get your interest going, and maybe you dig deeper into one or more of these concepts, because we definitely need new people to be joining this field. Without creativity and innovation, our world just is not going to be as robust and resilient. And so I welcome all of you to use this information, build upon it, and then share with the larger community. So thank you for joining us today. We are going to talk about ecology, some notable ecologists, and just kind of dig deeper into this concept, which is also in itself very wide in its breadth and depth. So very tip of the iceberg today. Just so you know, I am not a trained ecologist, but I am a trained botanist. And I think that after a few more years of experience that I've gained, I'm pretty good at zooming out, looking at big picture things, asking lots of questions. I'm very curious. And my Montessori training also helped me, kind of look at those big concepts and then be able to zoom in as I get more in depth, but kind of starting with that big concept. We always have a wonderful lunch on the bistro, and so I'm gonna wait to introduce my lunch to you until our special guest comes on. But this lunch is put together with her in mind, and just thinking about all of the different ways that we interact with our world and what things we're consuming, what things we are promoting, what things we are valuing. That all comes into play in ecology, and we'll talk about that. We also usually have a little bit of homework. And so your homework for this off week that we'll have before we jump in again on the 17th is to tell us about your energy flow. So your personal energy flow. And as we talk about some of these concepts today, you'll get a little bit more knowledge about that. But we're thinking about what energy we take in, what fuels us, what are our outputs. We're going to talk a little bit about permaculture today as well. And it definitely has some of that, kind of personality to it of how we interact with our environment and how we gain and give energy. So if you could think about that, you can always tag us and share that with us on our social media at Civic Garden. So when I was preparing for these last two sessions, I was, of course, a little bit sad that kind of this whole year of projects coming to fruition, but it's not the end. I might take a little hiatus during the summer to plan something new, but we'll definitely bring the bistro back. So don't worry about that. But this personal piece of ecology really hit hard because I was hired into this position and the ecology education manager. I had to think about that. I was like, okay, well, I'm a botanist. What do I know about ecology? And so the first thing that I did was start to ask people I respect, how do you define ecology? And I was also writing a new field study for some of our high schoolers to come to the Civic Garden Center and explore plants and explore our grounds and learn about sustainable concepts. And so I was interviewing different people, and guess what? Everyone that I asked their definition of ecology gave me a different personal definition. But there were some reliable consistencies as well. And so from some of the science teachers I heard from, well, you have to talk about nutrient cycling. You have to talk about energy flows. You need to talk about population dynamics and interactions. And so people had a lot of really wonderful opinions, and just kind of putting all of that together was really helpful for me to make this ecosystem field study that I prepared for the students that I think has gone over pretty well. We have a biodiversity section. We're talking about how important it is to notice nutrients in our environment and how we can keep those nutrients where we want them, but also just thinking sustainably about our world. And so I'll kind of give you a little bit of an insight on who I kind of was inspired by on that towards the end of our session today. But let's talk about plant ecology. What is plant ecology? The definition is the scientific study of the relationships between plants and their environments. And so really we're thinking about biotic and abiotic factors and how they are interdependent and interconnected. And so a lot of the different topics we've talked about on the bistro before now have focused on very singular things. It's okay, we're talking about the plant structure. We're talking about the plant cells. We're talking about the organelles inside the plants. We're talking about the dynamics of how we're changing the genetics of these plants. So it can be very focused and very toned in, right? So on a very small thing. Versus ecology, which is a little bit more zoomed out. Now, I will say there are ecologists doing amazing research that is very specific to certain species interactions, but it's always with this in mind. Okay, what are we missing? What other variables are we needing to include, and how can we encompass all of those different pieces together to think about the success of a habitat? Something that comes to mind that I hadn't included in my notes today, but I'm just thinking about, was when I went to Tucson to visit my sister, and we went to Biodome. I don't know if you guys have heard of Biodome. I think they made a silly movie about it a long time ago. But the concept was really interesting. So they wanted researchers and scientists to live in this enclosed, essentially like terrarium type of system where there was going to be no in or out exchange. We were kind of practicing for living like on Mars or on the moon or something like that. Can we create these enclosed habitats that people can survive in? And every detail was thought of. Of course, there's tons of funding, lots of people interested in this idea, and they wanted it to be successful. So they really tried to think of every single detail. When we went on the tour, we found out that the researchers that had been selected to live in this environment were not able to fulfill their full duties. And why was that? What happened was the off-gassing from the concrete that they had used to terraform some of the habitats that they had water and plants in. The off-gassing was killing those biotic organisms. Like the amount of planning that had to go into that, and then to admit, wow, we missed this, just so many environmental factors. And they are still using the facility for other things, but who's going to have that in the back of their head? How many voices do we need to include? And so that's just part of that ecology piece is the more you know, the more you know, the more people you interact with, the more questions that you ask. And we're really never done exploring, which is why I think that ecology is really exciting. And so we're really thinking about these interactions. Something that we talk about with ecology is going to be plant distribution and abundance. Why are certain plant communities found where they are? When you review some of our past topics, our archive, you'll notice that we did talk about a particular plant that they're growing in their biotech lab at the zoo that needs a cooler environment for its roots versus its leaves. And so those very specific interactions that these plants have with their environment only are known based on lots of data and observations. So we really need to quiet ourselves, start to look beyond, those very specifics and really think, okay, what is happening in this larger community? We also discuss plant adaptations in plant ecology, how they are better adapted to their environment in other ways. Interactions that they have with fungi, microorganisms, competition, for example. Who's getting the most light? Whose roots are going the deepest? Whose shoots are going the highest? We also think about plant community dynamics. Evolution and plant biodiversity is very important for ecologists as well, and thinking about how these different environments have changed over time. In our paleobotany talk, it was really neat to talk to our paleobotanist who was talking about how she found places where there were once forests and now are not Antarctica, right? So we wouldn't think of forests being in Antarctica, but these land masses still hold these stories that we can listen to and hear if we're able to collect the data and know where to look. And so that was a really neat way to listen to that. We also think about ecological organizational levels. So going from small to big, you're starting off with an organism, right? So we're all at that level. We're an organism. And then we form a population. So multiple organisms that are the same species and inhabit a particular area and are able to interbreed are considered a population. Populations in groups together of different species form communities, and they interact with each other in a particular area or habitat. These can be characterized by the competition, predation, or mutualism, which we'll discuss later, that happens within these communities. And we want to think about how that distribution and interaction is benefiting or possibly harming other communities. So not today, but we're really going to dig into conservation and invasive species in a couple of weeks. So you'll want to tune in to Ecology Part 2 when we talk about that. And then after community, we get into an ecosystem level. This is biological communities and its physical environments, which includes abiotic factors, so things that are non-living, water, sunlight, soil, topography, wind, things like that we need to consider, different vectors. If you're doing your permaculture analysis, is how we would call that. Landscape is the level above ecosystem, and these are connected ecosystems within a geographic region that are characterized by distinct landforms and land use patterns. And then we get into biomes, which are ecological, regional, characterized by distinct climates, distinct vegetations, and animal life. And then biosphere is the highest organizational level, which encompasses all living things and their environments on Earth. So until we find another planet that's inhabited by living things, we've got biosphere as our major, larger hierarchical system. And so we want to understand how these different levels work together and be able to, analyze the different establishment of them, especially if we're trying to reforest an area or we're trying to reestablish a native plant population. We really need to understand the dynamics of what's happening in those plant communities in their natural space. We live in a city, I live in a city, and so I am constantly trying to reintroduce plants to an area, but then also understanding that there are microhabitats, there are different factors that influence the plant success that's going to be happening on my property based on the fact that I have chickens and I have rabbits and I have young children. There's things that might not thrive in that dynamic ecosystem that I'm creating. And so just understanding that, what's happening to all of these factors. In our agronomy talk, I thought that it was really neat to hear him discuss all of these soil elements that we need to consider. And so really, we've kind of heard ecology popping up in lots of our other sessions in the past. Talking about plant interactions is pretty cool, and I wanted to review a couple of them with you. So competition, we probably are familiar with that. This is why we weed, right? So get the weeds out so that they're not taking away those nutrients, that they're not taking too much water or maybe shading out plants. And so we want to make sure that there's not a lot of competition for the plants that we want. There's also things called mutualism, and that's when both things are benefited. So if you think about like pollination, for example, a pollinator is not out there being like, all right, it's 3 o'clock and I'm going to pollinate 15 plants and I'm going to go home. They want to collect food. They're looking for fuel. They're looking for nectar. And so they're benefiting from searching for those things by getting them from the flowers, whereas the flowers are also benefiting by getting their pollen spread around. So it's a mutualistic benefit. We also then have predation, herbivory, parasitism. Some of these things aren't super great. But if you remember our talk about mistletoe, which is a parasite and can actually kill plants, and how people are trying to just target that certain parasite with the air rifles that they had retrofitted with herbicide, like really interesting stuff. They're like, no, we don't want parasites on some of these plants. How do we just get the parasite to go away without hurting the plant that it is attached to? And so very interesting dynamics there. We also have something that we've discussed before called alleliopathy, where plants put out chemicals from their roots to reduce the possibility of other things growing. Garlic mustard, black walnuts, these are examples of plants that prohibit other things besides themselves from growing in that space. And we have symbiosis, which is also going to be like a long-term relationship between different organisms. This comes up with nitrogen fixation and mycorrhizae. There are legume plants, such as soybeans, that will have these nodules that hold fungus, and the fungus can fix nitrogen in the soil and make it available to plants, which is why we do this crop rotation between corn and soybeans, so that we're creating an ecosystem where we are providing nitrogen to the corn that needs it the following season by planting these legumes to really boost that in the soil. I just find these to be very exciting. The list kind of goes on and on there. Population ecology is also very important, and I would be very remiss if I did not recognize that population ecology was a class that lots of my friends took, and it was not necessarily their favorite. Lots of math, lots of statistics in that, but if that's something that is interesting to you, then definitely check out population ecology. Talks about genetics, it talks about distribution, it talks about how different populations will grow either exponentially or logarithmically. And so I definitely want to mention that for all my friends who are like, oh, don't forget about that. That was a big one. And then ecosystem ecology is something that I feel like we at the Civic Garden Center really try to pay attention to, especially with our conservation work. And this is where you're talking about nutrient cycling and energy flows. So something that we talk about with the young kiddos, and this might be a review, are food chains and food webs. And so how does that energy flow from our sun, getting all of that solar radiation, into the primary producers, which are the plants, and then our primary consumers, and then our secondary consumers, all the way to our tertiary consumers, which, congratulations, we all made it into the apex predator group when we were born. And so we are able to kind of follow these energy flows through a system versus nutrient cycling. that would be more examples of how we compost and why we collect leaves and food scraps to try to hold on to some of that nitrogen, some of those other nutrients that we need to cycle through a system. We don't get more clean water on this planet. We can't just order it from Venus or something. It's all right here. So we have to be able to clean it, to filter it, to use it wisely. And it's the same thing with other vital nutrients in our ecosystems. I want to discuss a couple of notable folks who are really invested in this field and have dedicated a lot of their research. The first one I want to mention is Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. Some of you may have heard of her. I got familiar with her when I lived in Florida. I was living in Coral Gables and actually would walk my dog past her home. She's not living anymore. She passed in 1998. And so they have reserved her home as a historic space. And it was a beautiful little kind of bungalow. I'm like, what's up? What's up with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas? And if any of you have been to the Everglades, you will know that it's a very unique ecosystem. And so she wrote an article called River of Grass. And the way that she was able to frame that ecosystem into something that should be conserved and something that should be celebrated versus something that should be drained and developed massively changed the landscape of South Florida. And so I'm so grateful to that work that she did, because it was just looked at as a stinky swamp for a long time. And now to be able to go there and see the alligators and see all of the birds and hear all of that wildlife. If you take a bike ride around there, there's a 10-mile loop that you can take. It's epic. I mean, very, very cool. So she was one that really fought tirelessly to protect the Everglades, and her advocacy efforts led to the establishment of Everglades National Park in 1947, as well as other efforts that she did in her later life. Rachel Carson is also a very notable person in this field, and she wrote a book called Silent Spring, which really highlighted the use of pesticides, particularly DDT, on the environment and how that bioaccumulates into different species. And so as that DDT was leaking into waterways and then being consumed by fish and then being consumed by birds, and there was a lot of die-off of species, she really brought to light this issue. And so it's definitely one of those kind of keystone works that we talk about. Another amazing advocate was Wangari Maathai, who was a Kenyan environmentalist and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. She founded the Green Belt Movement, which was a grassroots movement to plant trees in Kenya. And they planted thousands of trees and lots of women empowered to do this work to be able to reforest Kenyan areas. And so she was also a wonderful advocate for women's rights. And so I wanted to recognize those three stellar women. I also want to acknowledge Sir David Attenborough, who some of you might know. His voice is very recognizable. He does a lot of documentaries, Blue Planet, Life on Earth, does a lot of documentaries. But when I was preparing for this particular field study, I was at the library. My kids are like on the computer doing whatever kids like to do at the library, which usually is not reading books, which is fine. So I'm sitting there reading this book called A Life on Our Planet. He published this in 2020. And the observations that he made from being a young documentarian to his later life, and how he was even just able to see visible changes in spaces around the world that he had visited, and to see the human encroachment on certain environments, or the degradation of environments, or the restoration. And so he had a lot of really great stories in that. But someone that he highlighted in that book was the work of Kate Rayworth, and she talked about donut economics. And so even that's not like pure ecology. If you don't know about donut economics and Kate Rayworth, I definitely recommend you looking her up. This was something that kind of became a linchpin for how I communicate to people about sustainability, and how we need to think about the human element and how we move forward with that. It's not realistic to think that humans are never going to interact with their environment, or that we always are doing something that's bad. There are a lot of wonderful things that people can do to ensure the stability of our environments. And so thinking about what humans need to survive, what environmental factors we need to consider, and how we keep those things in balance, kind of the essence of donut economics. Plus, donuts are delicious. So I did mention permaculture earlier, and so before I bring my guest on, this will be my last little topic for this moment. But if you are familiar with permaculture, it talks about different ways that we interact with our spaces, but also utilizing those elements that are already there. And so can we create a swale on contour with the current topography to be able to capture some water and plant some fruit-bearing trees? How do we interact with our property? What's like our major zone 1, zone 2, zone 3? What are we seeing every day? What are we visiting maybe once a week? Think about how we flow in our current life. And so I took a year-long permaculture design certificate course through the Cincinnati Permaculture Institute. And it was just really wonderful to talk to people about how they interact with their environment on a daily basis and what types of habitats and ecosystems are we fostering there. Permaculture uses something called guilds when they plant, which will include multiple plants in a singular kind of garden bed, I guess traditional setting, if you want to think of it that way, and plants that can help fix that nitrogen in the soil, plants that can pull up things from deep down with deep roots, things that can provide shade or attract pollinators. And so really thinking conceptually about how we're going to design landscapes. So those were some things I wanted you to consider. And now I'm very excited to introduce my very good friend and our guest for today, Kayla Kahn.
What's up, Botany Bistro?
Awesome. How are you?
I'm great.
Wonderful. Are you hungry?
I'm always hungry. I can always eat.
So today for the bistro, we did something we haven't done in the past.
Oh yeah.
We got takeout.
Love it. So this is from Dush Mess. It's my favorite Indian place in Cincinnati. It's in Clifton. If you're in the area, you have to go there because it's delicious and you get so much food and it's fresh and local and tasty.
Cheers. Cheers. Well, mine's a little spicy. I'm going to save it for later.
Oh, good.
And so tasty. And so when we were preparing for today, I was very excited to have Kayla on. She is a worker here at the Civic Garden Center. She works with me a lot. And she's our program associate. And she can't eat everything that I can eat. And so sometimes people bring in really tasty things like, oh, it has walnuts, or oh, it has coconut flour, or whatever that is. And so today I was like, oh, you're my special guest. And how do I recognize, acknowledge, and respect how you interact with the world? Mm-hmm. And so I knew that she really enjoys this Indian spot. And so I was like, well, let's go for it. Yeah. But just thinking about the different ways we all interact and the different things that Kayla notices about the world that I don't notice, because that's not something that I have to pay attention to. But now that I have a close friend that needs those things to be paid attention to, it's been eye-opening. And so I'm very grateful to have you on, and we're going to have a delicious lunch.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So today I wanted to make sure I included another person because we're talking about interactions. So when we talk about ecology, it would be, I think, not appropriate for me to have these sessions solo. And so Kayla's been amazing to work with me today. But I wanted to talk to her about the ecology of Kayla. All right, and so we can all practice this in our own lives. How do we observe the way that we interact with the world? Is it, something that we do daily? Is it something that we get in the routine of? If we don't make these observations, we can become kind of complacent or take things for granted. So let's talk about Kayla.
Yeah, so I really appreciated Mary's question because it made me think about it a lot more. It's like, what's my ecology? What's different spaces am I in? But how I got interested in ecology and where I really started my journey was growing up, much to my mom's dismay, who's on this call today. So she'll definitely get a chuckle out of this. But she had these landscape rocks all along her yard. One of my favorite activities growing up was lifting them up and seeing what I could find. Sometimes splashing water to, get the worms coming up, but constantly moving these landscaping rocks, seeing how they were changing daily, weekly, monthly, all season long. That was one of my favorite things. I'm from Lisle, Illinois, which is a small suburb outside of Chicago, and we are famous for being the home of the Morton Arboretum. So I was lucky enough to grow up with very big trees in my front yard and a beautiful park with even more trees to visit. Not too far from me. So I definitely grew up outside, was always kind of interacting with the natural world. And then growing up, I was a part of this club called Science Olympiad, which I always say is the reason why I am the way that I am. It's a competitive science test-taking club, basically. So there's all these different events about different topics in science, and I was always most drawn to the things that were like ecology was literally an event, or invasive species, or anything that really got me interacting or thinking about the natural world more was what I wanted to be learning about. So I did that club from junior high all the way through my senior year of high school. I got all my friends involved with it. I was like, come do science with me. And then when it came to like, what do I want to study in college? I was like, thinking about, career and stuff, but you're 16, 17, 18, like you don't know what you want to do with your life. But I asked myself two questions. I was like, what do I like to learn about and what am I good at? I thought about Science Olympiad, this club that I had opted to be in for 7 years of my life. And what was I good at? I was good at the ecology, environmental science events. So that's how I ended up going to Xavier and studying environmental science. The cool thing that I loved about environmental science, though, is that there's a role for everyone to have. It is the most interdisciplinary, I think, major that someone can have because there's so many different angles that you can look at it from. So I also minored in economics because I really liked that intersection of, people talk about environmental policy, but they're like, who's going to pay for it? Or, so that the conversation of money when you're talking about the environment is always, this follow-up. So I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to know that sector so I could talk about it more educatedly. I don't know. I was a sociology minor for a while because I love how people interact with the environment. I love the way that every person has a different need from their spaces. Do you want your space to feed you? Do you want your space to feed insects, animals? So that's, what I like to study, what I like to talk about is because it's intersectional. We all have a place here in the environmental field. So
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't know you have an economic background.
I do.
That's awesome.
Yeah, all the graphs and supply, demand, I can tell you all about it.
She does love a good spreadsheet.
That's true.
And so in your daily life, you have added some things to your environment. Now you have a dog.
Yes, I do have a dog. His name is Walter, affectionately known as Stinky, but he's my sweet, sweet boy. He's a 4-year-old Blue Heeler Lab mix. We recently found out he can climb ladders, which is hilarious to watch. But yeah, Walter is a big part of my personal ecosystem. And the first thing in the morning, what do? You take your dog out, you play with him. I work a lot. Sometimes he can come to work with me, but I got to make sure that he's, doing what has enough stimulation at home so he's not bored while I'm gone all day. But I am lucky to be in spaces and outdoor spaces where my dog can tag along. I also work at a horse farm, which is a big part of my personal ecosystem as well. Walter loves it out there because he just gets to be a farm dog. He's not a farm dog, but he likes to pretend he's a farm dog. But horses are a big part of my life, taking care of the animals there. And in my work at the Civic Garden Center, I talk about conservation, and I work a lot in conservation. And that farm that I'm at is surrounded by 60 acres of woods. So I'm like looking around and seeing things happening, and I'm like, hey, can I plant some things? Can I, remove some honeysuckle and stuff? So our own worlds really meld together when you are able to work in spaces that you're passionate about and that you're interested in. So
yeah, adding those pieces together really form like our full identities, and they're always changing. And so I think that the ability to be like, what's missing in my life? Like, I know that you did a lot more work with horses when you were younger, and then that was something that was missing for you, and you were like, I'm gonna go seek that out and add that to myself. And you brought one of your children.
Oh
here.
yeah, my other children. Hey mom, I haven't killed her yet. Although being a plant person, I'm wearing little earrings that say crazy plant lady. I always say that I can't take care of plants inside. So my goal for the year was I love lemons. Anyone who knows me is that I'm always drinking lemonade. I love lemons, everything. So I decided to buy a lemon tree from Stark Bros Nursery. They have beautiful dwarf lemon trees. She's about 4 weeks old, or at least 4 weeks into my possession, alive and well.
So beautiful.
Her name is Luna Lemon. But this is something that is new to my ecosystem and new to me having to take care of and learn about, like what nutrients I need to be adding, what water I need to be adding. You know, I'm providing these services to Miss Luna, and she's going to be providing me with goods back. Something that I've always loved about ecology is just the ecosystem interactions. That's what I always said I wanted to be. I wanted to be an ecologist. I wanted to know about how ecosystems interact with each other and how different species interact with each other. One of my favorite stories is the pawpaw tree, one of my personal favorite trees. Had relations with megafauna that were living in North America. And the tree said, hey, megafauna, you know, they're not actually talking, but through their, processes, they're talking to each other. But the pawpaw was like, hey, you are really big. You know, the megas in this name. We're talking about giant sloths and mastodons, these crazy large animals. And the pawpaw's like, I need my seeds to get spread. I don't have legs. You need to move my seeds. But if you climb up me to eat my fruit, you're going to knock me down. So instead, the pawpaw drops its fruit to the ground when it's perfectly ripe to be eaten. So these animals can come through and eat the fruit without having to climb up the tree and break the tree branches. So the tree gets what it needs, the animals get what it needs, and then the cycle continues. And that's just one of my favorite ecological examples. The same with the honey locust, because they've got the massive spikes on them. So it's like, hey, don't climb, but I'll feed you, but don't climb on me. It's just some of my favorite things that get me really excited, because people don't know that. It took me a while to learn that. I learned that pawpaws make fruit and they're delicious. I learned that you should wait till they're on the ground to eat them. But I didn't know the millions of years of evolution that brought that to be the case. So just putting these puzzle pieces together is really, really fun.
Yeah, and I think it's really rooted in that innate sense of curiosity, that you're like, I want to keep asking questions. I'm okay with saying right now that I don't know, but I'm going to go find that out.
Find out someone who does know, whose, job is to research these things, or indigenous knowledge that has been lost over years of time. So Mary and I have started a natural plant dye garden, and a big part that got me excited about it is we wear clothes. We all wear clothes. Our clothes are colorful. I'm a colorful person. I wear bright colored clothes all the time, but I don't love how those clothes are made. I'm very aware of the fast fashion industry and the chemicals and all these things that cause our clothes to get these beautiful colored dyes, that where those chemicals end up. So to combat that, we planted a natural plant dye garden. That's been my rabbit hole for this season, is learning about these plants that create these really beautiful dyes that I know when they get washed off and eventually end up probably in our waterways, that it's not going to cause a lot of the damages that we see the chemicals from our clothing and textile industry does now. But a lot of that knowledge where I'm looking comes from indigenous cultures. Wearing colorful clothing isn't new. By any means. It's something that's been happening for thousands of years. Using those as my sources, it's been a lot of fun. And those mentors that I have been able to find too, that also pull from those same sources, which is cool.
Yeah, we really, I think, it's a group effort, right?
Yeah, always a group effort. It's an ecosystem.
It's an ecosystem. We're constantly asking these questions, and then, maybe we're satisfied with the answer, maybe we're not, maybe we don't get an answer.
Yeah. And
the fact that, we're not born with the knowledge of how to grow our own fiber and our own dyes and our own food. A lot of, times people have no experience with that. So we're really trying to awaken those senses so that we know a little bit more about how to protect and conserve these ecosystems.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share with us before we open the floor?
No, through Mary and I's work, we run the Green Teens program together, so we're working with a lot with our youth, and just the more that I learn and can be curious, I get kids that just think of trees like telephone poles. once your eyes start to, open up a little bit, then that's when the questions start coming. And so I love seeing that. I love being a part of that. I love sharing this knowledge out because I know as soon as I learn something cool, I'm like texting people. I'm like, guess what I just learned? Like, did you know you could use fleabane for this? And it's just like, so it's this constant sharing of information that I think improves our human ecosystem that has been so detached from our environmental world that we don't know and don't recognize a lot what's happening outside of ourselves. So once you start to reconnect those dots, our life can only be fuller because we're recognizing more life around us.
Yeah.
So that's just something that I love about what I get to do and about ecology and ecology. It's a lot of fun.
Literally shout that at each other several times
a day.
Well, this has been so much fun, and thank you for sticking on this long. I am going to open up the chat now, and we'll be ready for questions.
What are my favorite natural dye plants? This is my first year, so I'm totally amateur hour. But I have dyed with goldenrod and marigolds, and those give such a bright, beautiful yellow dye. Black walnuts are super easy. You just throw it in a bucket, and it does its thing, and you get this like rich chocolatey brown. This year, the ones that I'm most excited about is we are growing Japanese indigo, which gives a bright robin's egg blue that you can get really dark blue too. So that's really what I'm most excited about. And the Black Knight Scabiosa, which will give me like a maroon kind of color. I always have students ask me for certain specific colors, so I've got nearly all of the colors in the rainbow in the dye garden, and if that plant doesn't specifically give that color with some different additions, you can usually get it to change the color. So I'm hoping to get all the colors. But the Black Knight Scabiosa and the Japanese indigo are probably the ones I'm most excited for this year.
Yeah, we soaked the seeds for the sunflower, red Hopi dye sunflower, because you should soak them overnight. And the water, we soaked them in.
Bright purple.
It was
awesome.
It was amazing. These seeds are they're ready to share their gifts with us. So I'm excited about that one too. Our big trick was trying to figure out what we were going to do with non-plant fibers because we're not using wool. We did get some alpaca yarn.
Yarn.
Very but exciting. Yeah, plant dyes adhere better to protein fibers in some cases than cellulose fibers. So I was told by our mentor over at the Weavers Guild to soak the cotton garments that we're dyeing in soy milk and let it dry that way, and then the dye can adhere to the soy protein. So lots of different ways to test it out, and the mordants that you use make a big difference as well. We're really trying to be kind of low maintenance.
Thanks, guys.
We'll see you later.
Bye.